Okay, well, I want to go ahead and welcome everybody tonight. And those of you that are watching later on, we appreciate you coming back and watching this and learning a little bit about our amazing seminar, Abraham Lincoln and His America. And we have a dynamic group here tonight, and we're very excited to talk about this. And so basically, it's pretty casual. Um, I'm Jeff Scott. I'm our Vice President of Education, and I'll introduce our distinguished guest here in a moment, and also our co-host and our program director. But we welcome you tonight. And again, the format is kind of like we'll go for about 30 minutes, maybe a little less, depending on the flow of it. And then if anybody has any questions, we encourage you to put them in the chat tonight. We've had a lot of interest in this seminar, and I'm sure it's only going to increase for the next couple months. So we encourage you, we do have some spots left for this seminar, so we encourage you to apply and finish the summer strong before you head back to school and everything. And so I'm going to share our screen here and bring up the slides, and so people can see it. And so there's our seminar. I've added some pictures here of Lincoln. Dr. Gelzo may be thinking, oh, I could add better pictures than that, and so forth. So I did not draw that picture of Lincoln over there in the corner, though.
I'm so
And so
relieved.
tonight, like I said, I'm Jeff Scott. I'm our Vice President of Education at Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge. And tonight we have a very distinguished guest with us, Dr. Alan Gelzo. And Dr. Gelzo is a leading scholar in the field of history, particularly Abraham Lincoln. He's done worked at Gettysburg College, Princeton, just written numerous books, and just a all around wonderful person and somebody that always connects with his audience. And so, Dr. Gelzo, we're honored to have you here tonight and to share a little bit about the seminar here in a few minutes.
Very good.
Okay, and so let's see, let's continue on. And so some of you may be asking out there, and you've never been to Freedom's Foundation before. I tell you, I'm at Freedom's Foundation because I love this place. I love what we do. I'm passionate about civic education in this country, passionate about our history. As a teacher, I brought students up to Freedom's Foundation for our student programs. I came many times as a teacher and did various things for Freedom's Foundation over the years, and I'm very honored to help lead our education department. And as an educator, somebody that taught elementary, middle school, and high school, and taught adjunct classes as well at the college level, I know how difficult it is out there, and certainly our guests do as well. And that's why it's so important for you to have opportunities during the summer for not only enjoyment, but enjoyment and learning, and also networking. And that's what this seminar is about. It's basically 6 days. We start on a Sunday and we end on a Friday. And obviously, we have amazing scholars. Dr. Gelzo is pretty much going to be leading this one. He is our lead scholar for this. Abraham Lincoln and His America. We'll be doing a site exploration, which for this one, we'll be going to Gettysburg. We also have content and activation sessions. So a lot of times, we'll be doing activities based on what Dr. Gelzo is going over. Georgette's also going to be there to help lead some of these activities. And the networking is amazing. You're going to meet people from all over the country. You probably will develop some friendships. And also, you'll be able to share resources with people, going into the next school year. So it's just an amazing place at Freedom's Foundation. And there you see there's a beautiful campus. We're located about a mile down the road from Valley Forge National Park. And we have a little over 70 acres. And as you see here, this is the MacArthur Building. Yes, named after Douglas MacArthur. And we have the Martha Washington Building over here in the corner. We have 2 dormitory style facilities. So when you come to a week at Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge, you're going to be staying on this beautiful campus. You're going to have an opportunity to explore. You'll have your own room there in the dormitories. You'll be eating on campus. And it's just an amazing place. Until you're there, I can't explain how great of a place it is. And so obviously we'd love to have you. Okay, these are some of our learning outcomes that we'll be looking at. We're going to be looking at what shaped Lincoln, throughout his life. Sometimes we study Abraham Lincoln, and it's always interesting. We always think we know Abraham Lincoln till somebody really shows us who he is and goes at a deeper level. Because sometimes we're fooled in knowing Abraham Lincoln because we hear his name all the time. We see his pictures all the time. Okay, probably one of the most photographed, certainly, of our early presidents. And so we're going to look at his words. I think Dr. Gelso is going to do an amazing job looking at what Lincoln said, and what those words meant. Lincoln was a person that understood words. I know from my own teaching and so forth, and teaching about Lincoln, certainly not to the level of Dr. Gelso, but it's always been one of those things to focus on Lincoln's words. He understood the power of language and how it impacted people. And then we'll look at Gettysburg and Lincoln's words at Gettysburg and what Gettysburg really meant, okay, in America. Okay, everybody, these are some of the big topics for the week. And in a moment, after we say who's going to be with us, Dr. Gelso, feel free to go in depth more so on each of these days, kind of what we're going to be looking at. Sunday, we're going to have orientation. We'll have a Medal of Honor spotlight. And we'll be looking at what we do is like you sign in on a Sunday, you come in, you check in, I should say, you get your room, you probably relax a little bit. We'll have dinner that night. We'll be going over kind of, housekeeping type of stuff. We'll have, like I said, a Medal of Honor spotlight. Much of our property is honoring the Medal of Honor, the highest award that can be received in the military. It's a beautiful area to walk and reflect. And certainly want all of you to look at that. We'll probably be looking at a Medal of Honor recipient from the Civil War era, since, we're covering Abraham Lincoln. And what makes this very special is Abraham Lincoln is the one that signed this into law. And so we'll also be looking, Dr. Gelso is going to start us off that night with, is Lincoln still relevant? And so we'll be looking at that. And so Monday, we'll be looking at, and these are the big topics. Obviously, we're going to break it down a little bit into smaller chunks and everything. When Dr. Gelso kind of sent me his topics, I kind of looked at these as kind of the bigger areas that you'll have on your syllabus. And so, Dr. Gelso, do you have anything to say, like starting out with Lincoln, is he still relevant? What are we talking about there?
When Lincoln died on the 15th of April, 1865, standing in the room where he breathed his last, his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, made a famous comment, "Now he belongs to the ages." Well, it seemed for many years that Stanton had called that one entirely correctly, that Lincoln was an example to Americans in particular of what it was to be a great emancipator, what it was to be a great example of democratic politics, what it was to be an example of what the American dream can produce for people. Because in many ways, Lincoln himself almost lived that. We're now 160 years beyond Abraham Lincoln. And 160 years is a long time, packed full of many, many changes in American life. Can someone who lived and flourished in the 1860s still talk to us in a direct and meaningful way about what our lives should be and what should be important in it? That's a major question. There are many people who, in fact, doubt whether it's possible with that passage of time and with all the changes that we've seen to regard Abraham Lincoln still as being someone who speaks with the angels and speaks still to us. Now, I won't surprise you and I won't hold you in suspense. I will answer that question, yes. But there's quite some distance to get between the question and the answer. And there's a number of things we have to examine carefully so that not merely the instructor here is going to be saying yes, but you too, as participants, need to think and to reflect on what your answer to that question is. Is Lincoln still the man for the ages? We'll look in particular at the ideas that shaped Lincoln. I think one of the wisest things that was ever said about Abraham Lincoln was said by a man who practiced law with him out on the old 8th Judicial Circuit in Illinois, and that man was Leonard Swett. Swett, who knew Lincoln for nearly 20 years, said that anyone who took Abraham Lincoln for a simple-minded man would soon wake up with his back in a ditch. And I say that is one of the wisest and most perceptive things that anyone had to say about Lincoln, because it embraces two things. One is the fact that Abraham Lincoln's initial impression on people, and still remains the impression that many people have of Lincoln, is that Lincoln was a very ordinary person made of very ordinary materials, who was not pretentious, who was very humble, but who was very simple and straightforward, and somehow managed to navigate the waters of politics with his simplicity and his humility intact straight to the end. Well, that's what we might like to believe about Lincoln. Lincoln was, in fact, a good deal more complex than that. He was a man of ideas. He read with extraordinary care and with a great deal of breadth, more so than we often think. When people met Lincoln for the first time, the things that would strike them the most would be, well, for one thing, how, quite frankly, ugly he was. And Jeff, this is the truth. I'm sorry, but it is. He was homely, and he knew he was too. He spoke with a very high-pitched voice, and he had a very pronounced border state accent. And he knew that people would hear that, and then they would conclude, well, this man is some buffoon from the backwoods. He knew that people would draw these conclusions, and he let them. Because when they drew those conclusions, they would underestimate him. And when they underestimated him, then he would take full advantage of that. And he would work things his way. And before people realized it, they would be in that ditch that Leonard Swett described. So, yes, the appearance was one of great simplicity, but in fact, there were great depths. And we're really going to spend most of our time in this seminar examining those depths, understanding them, and also understanding what the sources were that Lincoln drew upon.
Wow. Just about listening to you right now, I'm so drawn in. It makes me want you not to stop, and just keep going. And because as somebody that's also passionate about this, and as I know Georgette is as well, it's just amazing. We can't stop learning. And you would think, and you just mentioned in 160 years past, you would think we'd know everything about Lincoln. As much as he's been out there in our landscape, so to speak, of learning, but we really don't. We only sometimes know the basics.
This is very true. And this is one thing I've discovered in studying and reading about Lincoln for many years. And that is, there's a tremendous amount that has been written about Lincoln and said about Lincoln, even movies made about Lincoln. But one of the great difficulties is that so many of them really follow in the same tracks. So that what you have with, let us call it the field of Abraham Lincoln, is you have one pathway that goes across the meadow, and it's deeply rutted because all the wagon wheels have followed in the same rut and kept digging it deeper and deeper over the years. But then when you look to either side, there's this great meadow. And in that meadow, there's been comparatively little exploration. I want to take us into that meadow, and I want us to
Mhm.
understand a great deal about the depth and the complexity of Abraham Lincoln. Maybe the best way I can sum this up is to say that Abraham Lincoln is a figure from history that I would like to meet.
Uh-huh.
There's many people
I
from the
like
past
that.
that I could do without, and I'm sure you could
Yeah.
too. But Lincoln is one of those persons that you really would enjoy the opportunity to meet the man.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to talk about, but Georgette, of course, is also going to be a large part of this. And Georgette and I are kind of the yin and yang of things because I will be the staid, laborious professor. Georgette will be the live wire who lights everybody up. And between the both of us, we're going to have quite an exploration of Abraham Lincoln over that particular week.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to this and being a part of that. And the thing about and looking at these other topics for the week, you got Lincoln as a thinking man. And I look at Lincoln as a thinking man. I think it's almost hard not to look at him as a thinking man because it's almost like the pictures you see he's thinking. Um, and then on Tuesday we got the shaping of Lincoln. I'm always interested in how his family shaped him in some way. After his father remarried, had a big impact on Lincoln.
And
Um,
and you
and
and
then
you
we'll
might
be
say, Jeff, that his family had an impact on him, but sometimes the nature of that impact was the exact opposite of what you might imagine.
mm,
Sometimes the nature of that impact was a negative impact,
mhm,
something he rebelled against, something he rejected. And I think you see that in some of the relationships he had within his family. One of them
mhm,
with his father, another with his stepmother. It's a
yeah,
very curious situation because Lincoln growing up is almost the inverse of one of the Grimm fairy tales. The Brothers Grimm tell you all about the wicked
yeah,
stepmother. No, with Lincoln, it's the exact opposite. His stepmother was the angel of his life, whereas his relationship
yeah.
with his father, that was a good deal more dicey. And seeing that peculiar juxtaposition, that makes you wonder about Lincoln and what kind of motivations acted on him, emerging from his family context.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And it was talking about influences in all these movies and the books have been done on Lincoln, and I've certainly read several great ones and seen several movies. I don't know if anybody out there was steered in the wrong direction as I was at one point and watched a movie called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer. I'm not sure. I did not check that movie out before I was thinking, wow, this is interesting. Now, maybe we're talking about Lincoln really taking out, the demons of society. I was not ready for him to be an actual vampire slayer. So that was a new look at Lincoln.
Well, Jeff, I will tell you,
Um,
I did see the movie. I have to admit, more or less out of a sense of duty, but in its own campy way, it was a fun movie to watch. I'll give it that much credit. I wouldn't take it seriously for as much even as 60 seconds. But then again, it didn't really pretend to do that. And anybody who went there thinking they were going to get a history lesson, really, about the best thing they were going to come away with was a bucket of popcorn. So
yes.
it was fun. It was interesting to watch. It was campy. It wasn't more than that, but it wasn't less than that. So I'll give it at least a little bit of credit for providing some entertainment.
These are wise words, Dr. Gilzo. And then Wednesday, we're going to be going to Gettysburg. Um, Gettysburg is an amazing place. And I don't know how many of you out there have been to Gettysburg and how many of you joining us have been to Gettysburg. But I think sometimes for the first time going to Gettysburg, it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
I know the first time I went to Gettysburg, it was like, whoa, okay, you hear about it, but then seeing everything, hearing everything, being in the presence of that, it's amazing. What do you envision for us doing at Gettysburg?
Well, among other things, we will, of course, take a good long look at the battlefield, but we'll also look at a particular place that is connected to Lincoln, and that is the Soldiers' National Cemetery, which was created on the battlefield in the months after the Battle of Gettysburg for the burial of the Union dead from the battle. Some 3,500 Union soldiers are buried in that cemetery. Fully a third of them are unknowns because there were no such things as dog tags in the Civil War. There were no burial registration units or anything like that. A third of those who are buried there are unknown. Lincoln came to Gettysburg at the invitation of the organizers of the cemetery. They asked him to give a few appropriate remarks. He didn't actually give the address. That was reserved for Edward Everett, famous Massachusetts politician and Harvard scholar. And he gave them a 2.5 hour doozy of an address. Lincoln was supposed to deliver just the very brief dedication sentences, which he did, 2.5 minutes. Well, which do we remember? The 2.5 minutes. It is probably the most famous speech in American history. And rightly so, because Lincoln draws into the 272 words of that address the American past, the crisis of the American present as it was in 1863, and the prospects of the American future. And he does it with an eloquence that staggered people even then. That people would say afterwards, as Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner did, and Sumner was quite an orator and a Harvardian in his own right. Sumner said that Lincoln was wrong in the address when he said that the world would little note nor long remember what we say here. No, Sumner said, the world has never forgotten what he said here. If anything, what Lincoln said at Gettysburg on the 19th of November, 1863, at the dedication ceremonies, Sumner said those words were, if anything, even more important than the battle. So we will stand on the place where those words were uttered, and we will look out as Lincoln looked out that day in November of 1863 at the semicircular rows of graves in the cemetery. And we, too, will seek to draw, as he put it, increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. So we'll look at the battle, we'll look at the battlefield, but in particular, we're going to look at what Lincoln said and did there.
Wow. That's amazing. Getting chills just thinking about that and listening to that. Um, I just have a question about, I've always heard that Lincoln thought that speech was terrible, and that is that true? And also, obviously he lived almost a couple more years after that. Did he have any sense as time went by in his own life that speech would resonate and did resonate?
The story that Lincoln thought he had failed in his Gettysburg address really begins with the man who was the master of ceremonies at the dedication, Ward Hill Lamon. Lamon was an old friend of Lincoln's from Illinois. Lincoln had arranged for him to be appointed Marshal of the District of Columbia, and he was the master of ceremonies that day on the platform at the cemetery. But Ward Hill Lamon, well, whatever else can be said about him, many people have scratched their heads and wondered what it was Lincoln saw in Hill Lamon that made him treat Lamon as this bosom buddy. Well, one thing, of course, which Lamon did bring to the relationship with Lincoln was loyalty. Loyalty was something Lincoln prized a great deal. But Lamon is not always terribly reliable in what he writes about Lincoln in the years afterwards. One of the stories he'd like to tell was that Lincoln muttered to him as the address was finished, as he turned to resume his seat, "That speech will never scour. It was a flat failure."
Hmm.
Well, that's interesting coming from Lamon, but there's really no evidence beyond Lamon's say-so that that was Lincoln's opinion. In fact, quite to the contrary. Lincoln spent a good deal of time working on that address. And what was more, afterwards, he drew up 5 separate copies of it, and those were distributed to various individuals and agencies for use. But he seems to have taken it very seriously himself, and I don't think that he believed for a moment that that speech had been a failure. It was reprinted across the country in the newspapers, and in little more than a year, it was being anthologized in school textbooks for school children to memorize and recite. So Lamon, I think, was trying, by saying this about Lincoln, he was trying to make the Gettysburg Address seem, in retrospect, so important that even Lincoln didn't see its importance.
Hmm.
Well, that's a generous sentiment, but the question is, does it really reflect what Lincoln thought? I suspect not.
Very interesting. And that is, I mean, it's so wonderful to put that in perspective like that. And obviously, Friday, we'll be looking at the Gettysburg impact and so forth. Thursday is very interesting. Looking at Lincoln in office. What's going to be the focus of that? What are we looking at, particular with Lincoln as president?
Well, start with this. When Lincoln is elected president, he is probably one of the most ill-prepared occupants of the White House. And I say that because Lincoln had served in public life really in 2 ways. He had been a state legislator in Illinois, 4 terms in the state legislature, and did very well in them. He served 1 term in the House of Representatives in the 1840s, and that was it. He had never been the mayor of his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. He'd never been a governor of the state of Illinois. He did not have some distinguished career in the Senate. And when people turned their attention to Lincoln after his election and tried to figure out what it was they now were going to encounter as a president, many of them felt a sense of disappointment. One newspaper editor, exasperated, asked out loud, "Who will write this ignorant man's state papers for him?" Well, we learned after, of course, that Lincoln brought to the job, if not the kind of resume that consultants and executive search firms like to see, he brought, nevertheless, certain qualities which turned out to be pure gold. Qualities like resilience, humility, humor, a real dedication to learning the ins and outs of the job, a capacity to communicate and communicate effectively with large numbers of people. Those were resources that people didn't discern in Lincoln at first. But over the course of the stress of his presidency and the Civil War, those were the things that advanced to the very beginning. And as early as 1863, the young man who worked for him as a secretary, John Hay, a young whippersnapper fresh out of Brown University with great aspirations to be a writer, John Hay turned on its head that old wisdom about no man being a hero to his valet. Well, it was exactly the opposite experience for young John Hay. Hay wrote in his diary, "I never understood until now how thoroughly the old tycoon controls everything. He runs the cabinet. He's overseeing conscription. He is taking care of the war. He sits there in his chair," Hay said, "like a backwoods Jupiter, throwing his thunderbolts." And then Hay added in a note, "No man is so good and kind as he. I believe that God has put him in this place." when you see something like that, then you realize you're looking at him through the eyes of someone who knew him on a daily basis and yet found so much to admire.
Mhm.
Many years later, Hay would go on to a career as Secretary of State under Theodore
Mhm.
Roosevelt. 3 weeks before he died, he had a dream that he was in the White House again, a young man, and Lincoln was coming to see him to talk about some papers that he had in his hand. You know, there's a wonderful finale to that, but it also speaks to the kind of impact that this man, Lincoln, otherwise someone that you would expect simply had no qualifications for the office he was going to fill, nevertheless filled it greater than any other president, perhaps except Washington, and maybe even a little bit more so than Washington.
Those are strong, big words right there. Powerful.
Mhm.
And what you're saying about Hay is very interesting to me in that I also look at, how people were around Lincoln that didn't respect him to begin with really grew to respect him. And as you mentioned, Edwin Stanton really grew to love Lincoln. And several people in his administration that they couldn't believe they were bringing in grew to love him. Is that true?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, Stanton actually starts out condemning Lincoln because
Mhm.
Stanton and Lincoln crossed paths in the late 1850s. This was an illegal case because Stanton, of course, was a lawyer.
Mhm.
Lincoln had been retained in a patent infringement suit. He was helping to defend John Manny, who had designed a mechanical reaper. Well, he was being sued by Colonel John McCormick, the inventor of the more famous reaper. Well, Lincoln was taken on by Manny's defense team, and Manny's defense team also included Edwin Stanton. When all of them were brought together for the trial in Cincinnati, Stanton took one look at Lincoln and went to the head of the defense team and said, "Where, where did you get that giraffe? He's an ignorant man. He's not going to help us." Stanton didn't realize that Lincoln overheard this. And yet, when Lincoln becomes president, in January of 1862, he turns to Stanton and invites Stanton to become his Secretary of War. And over the course of the war, Stanton, a man of, I think the word irascible could have been invented for Edwin Stanton. Stanton comes to trust Lincoln, to cooperate with Lincoln, to admire Lincoln, ultimately, in fact, to serve Lincoln. And it is, of course, Stanton who, at Lincoln's deathbed, utters those famous words, "Now he belongs to the ages." Lincoln had that impact on people. You had to work very hard to hate Abraham Lincoln.
And I think sometimes when you look at great leaders, when you have that aspect, you're right there. I mean, I can't think of what would be better for a leader. Um, okay, and so let's look at some of the people who, will be with us, obviously. Those were amazing words, and I hope all of you are excited about going even deeper into these topics. Georgette Hackman is with us, and Georgette's going to be our program director. Georgette's a dynamic teacher, loves education, very, she's a James Madison Fellow, very acclaimed in her own right, seemingly knows everybody throughout the history world. And Georgette, what are you looking forward to in terms of this week discussing Abraham Lincoln?
Well, Jeff, first of all, this will be the second week that I will spend being Dr. Gelzo's right hand. So it's kind of exciting, but it's no secret that I am a huge fan of Abraham Lincoln, like huge. So to get to spend a week with Dr. Gelzo and guide our group and learn from him and with him on this topic that is so near and dear to my heart It's just going to be such an exciting week. And obviously, some of my favorite lessons are centered around Lincoln and Lincoln's oratory skills and Lincoln's insight and character and some of the things that I like to share with my students. So I can't wait to share those lessons and learn about new lessons with our participants. So it's going to be a great week. And as you mentioned, I can't think of a better way to wrap up our summer than with Dr. Gelzo learning about Lincoln. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so that's wonderful. And we appreciate Georgette. Georgette will be there throughout the summer at our programs. And really does an amazing job of helping our teachers feel comfortable. And also leading dynamic like activation sessions and everything of that nature. And of course, we mentioned Dr. Gelzo. Dr. Gelso, if we we could talk about your accolades all day, the things you've accomplished. What is something though that you want participants to know about you? Say maybe they don't know.
I like music.
There you go.
I'll reveal a state secret.
Uh-oh.
My first year in college, I was a music major.
Huh.
I wanted to be a composer. There was only one problem. I just didn't have enough talent. Oh, the shattering discoveries you make your first year in college. Well, that was my shattering discovery. And you might say that everything I've done since has been a consolation prize for that, but I'm still a passionate music lover.
Yeah.
When I'm speaking here about being a music lover, it's classical music. I'm,
Yeah.
Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and lots and lots and lots of others. So,
Wow.
all right, I've let the cat out of the bag. You may now proceed to blackmail me.
Well, I'll say this. The music world's loss is our gain because you may have not been a composer of music, but you're a composer of historical understanding. And for all of us out there, that's a big deal.
Very fine.
Okay, and again, one of the other groups that will be with us during this time, and make sure if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat, please, because we're about to wrap this up. Unify America will be with us. They'll be with us just briefly on the last day of the week, early in the morning, talking about how to have better conversations in your classrooms, out in the general public, when you have differing opinions. And then they'll also talk about a follow-up we'll be doing in the fall with participants. So it's really good. And all of you out there know that if you're in the classroom, it can be difficult sometimes. Really touching up on topics today. And Unify America wants to bring us together and really have that discussion. Are there any questions, Georgette? Are there anything in the chat? Does anybody have any closing remarks?
No, Jeff, there are no questions in the chat. Just a reminder that applications can still be submitted. We'd love to have you join us at any of our programs, and any questions you have, you can reach out to the Freedoms Foundation staff and we'd be happy to answer any questions, anything that we could make the application process easier. But we'd love to see you and hang out with you this summer at Valley Forge.
Absolutely. And again, as we close, I want to thank Dr. Gelso for being here with us tonight. It's been an amazing discussion, and thanks to everyone else. And we hope to see you soon. Do great things out there. Continue to do great in your classrooms and continue to love this country. See you later, everybody. Thank you.